Today's podcast is an episode from the first year of the podcast, way back at the first year, one of the first ones we had, with Andrew Coverdale, who at the time was at Louisville Trinity. He won 11 state championships there as the offensive coordinator, and in 2019 moved to Cincinnati St. Xavier. There, he's also won another state championship as the offensive coordinator. In this episode, he shares the insight that he's learned over the years, the things that have helped him become a successful offensive coordinator. He's definitely become a friend in coaching and someone I've learned from, and I know in this podcast you'll learn from him as well. Here's my interview with Coach Andrew Coverdale.
Our guest today is somebody who is a friend of mine and someone who I like to talk football with, Andrew Coverdale. Andrew Coverdale is currently the offensive coordinator at Trinity High School in Louisville, Kentucky, where in 2 stints on the Shamrock staff, he's been a part of 5 state championship teams, including a state championship in 2016. Before assuming his present position in 2006, he served as the head football coach at Castle, Indiana High School for 3 seasons. He also was on the staffs at Brown County, McCutcheon, and Noblesville, all in Indiana, as well as serving on the staff as an assistant coach at Taylor University. He's a 1993 graduate of LSU and is widely respected for his thorough understanding of offensive football and his ability to teach players at all competitive levels. Andrew, great to have you here. Welcome to the Coaching Coordinator Show.
Keith, it's always good to talk with you, my friend.
I want to just let you know something here and let our audience know what of an influence you've had on me. You are the most detailed football guy I know out there, and this goes back to when I was getting my start at the high school level. I remember going to a Glazier clinic in Cincinnati, and I think you had like 6 or 8 different sessions where you were speaking. At the time, I had already read all of your bunch attack and your quick volume or quick passing volumes 1, 2, and 3. I had the videos that went along with it. And I just wanted to go and learn more from you. Those books and were something that I revisited almost every offseason in my career to look at some things we were going to do because they were just so full of detail and great coaching. And those 8 hours for me made a difference, whether you knew it or not. So I want to thank you for that. I thought it was a neat opportunity when years later we were at Ball State Clinic and I was speaking there and you were in the audience and you asked me some questions afterwards. I thought it was really neat how it had come full circle, and I know from there our friendship developed and we share ideas on the game now all the time. So it's been a neat thing, and I appreciate that about our game in general, that's the kind of brotherhood we have in coaching. But just wanted to say thank you to you, Coach.
Well, I appreciate that, and the inverse is completely true. I actually remember sitting in Stan Parrish's office together and talking wide zone, I think at the time.
Yep.
And, one of the questions I know that you're probably going to ask, not to jump ahead of the curve here, but in terms of some of the most important advice I ever got, Dan Robinson, very, very, very early in my coaching career, really impressed upon me how the game is so much bigger than any of us, and it's our responsibility to love the game by always giving back and never acting like we have the corner market on ideas. And, anything I did as a 24-year-old or a 27-year-old author probably came from a million sources, and so that advice is one of the things that served me awfully well is the community that gets created. When you loosely hold the ideas that you've been handed and share them with other coaches, that's where a lot of the best stuff's really at in our world, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Coach, let's get into it here, and let's go back to the beginning for you. What made you want to be a football coach?
I don't know if it's one thing or another. I would say probably the entryway for me was the less important part of it. And then as I walked through that entryway, the things that really mattered to me most now became evident. So even as a young kid, I was always fascinated by the tactical part of it, the strategic part of it. I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s, falling in love with the Air Coryell Chargers and wanted to understand what that was about and what made them who they were. I was not a very good player at all. I actually did not play beyond 8th grade, which caused a lot of problems for me later on. But I had a high school coach who was sort of willing to indulge all my snot-nosed questions about the technical parts of the game, and he allowed me really a lot of access to the high school program as a student manager, and then I did the same thing as an equipment guy at LSU and got to brush up against a lot of just really, really great teachers at that time, even though we were not very good as a team at that time. those collective experiences, I guess, just invited me further and further into what the profession was all about beyond just the initial X's and O's sort of lure of it. And I just had positive experiences all the way along the way that continued to encourage me.
Where did you get your start coaching?
Well, I got my degree from LSU in 1993 and came back home where I grew up in the Indianapolis area. And to be a teacher in Indiana, the certification's a lot different. So I had to take postgraduate classes to get my Indiana teaching license. And social studies teachers at that time were a dime a dozen. So I decided to go to Purdue, and basically I just started calling because I had no network, no connections. I wasn't a player. And so I just started to contact programs in the area to see if any of them had a use for, a 23-year-old with no background and no connections who wanted to coach. And there was a guy by the name of A.J. Rickard, who's a Hall of Fame coach in Indiana high school football. They had an extremely experienced veteran staff that just won a state championship. And he said, if you want to work, we'll put you to work. And I fancied myself at that time as this passing game expert, which is ridiculous for a 23-year-old. Mm-hmm. And the best thing he did is he assigned me to work with his offensive line coach. So I was the assistant varsity offensive line coach. I made $64 that season. But what I learned in terms of the staff and the program and the offensive line position in particular was it was a gold mine. And so I was a substitute teacher, a college student, and a volunteer assistant for a high school in Indiana.
As your career progressed, what would you say were some other key things in your learning as a coach that helped in your development?
That's a very good question. I think there are several, obviously. I think working with Dan Robinson that next year at Northwestern High School in Kokomo really exposed me to what was possible. It gave me a whole new framework for looking at the game, for just how to be a dynamic teacher, what it looks like to get. It is one of those moments where when you see Dan get in front of a room and do an installation or do a teaching, you instantly say, that's sort of what I want to be when I grow up. I've had that experience 4 or 5 times. Dan in a classroom setting is certainly one of those people. His systematics are unparalleled. His imagination is really unparalleled. I worked for a guy named Kevin Wright, initially just for 1 year, and then later on he took me to Trinity High School in Louisville with him. And Kevin is one of the best I've seen at really understanding what makes young men tick. And so I really grew in terms of connecting with my players by being with him. And obviously him taking me to Louisville Trinity, which is where I spent the majority of my career, was a major turning point. And then, I'm very fortunate at this point to have a boss, Bob Beatty, who followed Kevin to Trinity, who has a system and who he brought a framework with him to Trinity that was very similar to Dan's. And together we've been able to build out that framework. And it's a framework that football has grown and changed and all the different things that each group of kids brings to each individual year. And he's been a tremendous influence as well in any number of ways. And I think one of the things that we have together is sort of a team that runs the offense is we get the best of both worlds in the sense that he is there's a tension that's a real positive tension. He has the big picture. He has execution and precision and discipline. And what I bring to it is sort of the creativity piece from a background with Dan. So the tension and marriage of those two ends has really kind of, I think, given us the best of all worlds in the 15 years we've worked together.
And I know that Coach allows you to really drive that in terms of the scheme and the concepts and trusts you to put that all together. And for you, it starts with a philosophy. What's the philosophy of your offense?
Well, as it's gone on, I think it's become more people-driven. We want so for example, you would say from a technical standpoint, we're a multiple formation, multiple personnel group, multiple tempo, multiple launch point team that wants to build from a small core of runs and protections and really blossom that out to equip our kids to take advantage of whatever presents itself. So we want to have a manageable number of skills that can present itself in an infinite number of ways and allow us to use our best players in as many leverage situations as we can. So that's, I suppose, the technical end of it. We draw very heavily from NFL influences, although we're not an NFL offense. We draw very heavily from the University of Louisville. Coach Petrino's structure is very informs a lot of what we do for sure. But for me, what I really want, and I listened to you talk to Dub Maddox, and a lot of what he said really resonated. We're trying to create a collaboration among a room, and that room is led by me, and it's led by our coaches. But eventually, we want to create, and culture becomes almost one of those overused words to the point where you have to redefine it. But we want to have an environment where everybody feels full ownership and full input into what we're doing. And I thought Deb said it really well when he talked about having a collective consciousness. We haven't used that phrase, but it's very indicative of what we're trying to create. And I think a lot of that started with even how Bill Walsh would build his units. Obviously, he leads it, he orchestrates it, he drives it, but there's a belief and an ownership that you start building from the very first day that then expresses itself on the field on game night.
How do you build that collective consciousness that Dub talked about, or the word, everybody uses, culture? What specific things are you doing as a coach to build that within your room?
I think something that I really learned this last offseason, or something we've started doing, it's really helped, is, and maybe Urban Meyer has helped me with this more than anybody else, is we define everything very explicitly for our kids, and we try to break it down in such a way that it means something to them, and they can own it, and they can recite it back to us, and we can identify where we see it and where we don't see it. So, for example, we talk about culture ourselves. We talk from the very beginning about what is it. We talk about our vision as an offense. This is our vision. Then culture is the expectations that we hold each other to every day that allow us to pursue that vision. And so then we talk about, for us this year, because of the kids we had, toughness was sort of our byword this year. Well, toughness is one of those football coach words that may or may not mean anything to the 16-year-olds in the room that you're trying to connect with. So we gave toughness a very specific definition. We said toughness is my willingness to push beyond emotional, physical, and mental discomfort to do my job out of love for my teammates. And so then we say, okay, what are examples? What are the decisions that you make that create this toughness? And so what we try to do is have a very central, understandable, defined message that we can then reinforce in absolutely every setting that we're in. So when we're in the meeting room, how do we conduct ourselves? How do we respond? And so we manufacture, in this case with the toughness issue, we manufactured a lot of different situations throughout the summer and the off season. And then we would go back and say, here's where toughness did show itself. Here's where it didn't show itself. So I think all those things factor in. We talk about valuing smart and how smart has nothing to do with an IQ. Smart is a choice, and here are the choices you make, and we try to create a great pride that our kids have in knowing more about the game and how that translates to playing faster. So I think a lot of it just has to do with being real clear in definable terms with what you want, and then finding all kinds of ways in the everyday comings and goings of football to reinforce it. And for me, that maybe means saying fewer things, but doing a better job of defining and reinforcing those things.
Coach, thanks for sharing that. That was great stuff. I know teaching is very important to you too, and you've done a great job in explaining a lot of those things, and then just seeing you do it on some of the videos you put back, way back when. The attention to detail was incredible. What things are you and your staff doing now that best teach your systems and give them that understanding, and like you said, that collective consciousness that develops?
You've touched on it a lot. The flipped coaching is a big deal, and that connects to the culture. So we've over time created a culture, and we've shown them the benefit of you don't show up on a Monday. June is really important for us. We get through all of our installation once in June so that when we put pads on, it's review in a sense. But you don't show up on a Monday not having reviewed the huddle installation that you were sent over the weekend. It's just not accepted behavior. But again, there's the carrot and the stick, and the carrot to that is we want the guy down to our lowest level student to feel great pride and great reinforcement of knowing the details of the game. So we do stupid stuff in meetings, like they seem stupid, but they're really important. Like kids really want to get a smart point. Smart point means you raise your hand and you have the correct answer down to the detail exactly where we want it. And everybody does one clap for smart point. So a lot of little things on the positive and on the, the corrective side of just setting a high bar for your learning and setting a high bar for being able to articulate things a certain way. And I think the flipped part of it gives us a better chance to really zero in on their learning style, because they're not going to get it all the first time. And that's not our expectation, but at least we can start to have a conversation and we have raw material to work with, because all of us are trying to connect the what to the why and the the what to the how, because the how is what wins you the game, not the what. Understanding your assignments maybe a tenth of the battle, but you can't get to the what without the why, and you can't get to the how without the what. So I think the flipped part of it really gives us a great advantage, or at least a great starting point. We probably walk through more than the average high school team just because it gives them a chance to visualize it. I think that's an important part of it. We put our kids in pressure situations in every avenue we can, including the meeting room. And a lot of times it has to do with getting a feel for your kids and which ones need that the most. We had a borderline JV type of kid that we thought could maybe blossom. And so every single time there was a hard question about a split or a concept or an adjustment, we would put him on the spot. And initially he didn't handle it very well, but pretty soon he got to understand it. Every single time he was in the meeting room, he was going to answer, he was going to be asked a question, so he needed to be ready. And he embraced it, and he really developed in terms of that part of the game. So I think the flip part of it is a big deal. I think constantly driving the why behind the what, and then translating the what to the how. In other words, giving them a big picture of what we want, and then their technique becomes an extension of that. I think all those things are important.
Coach, something that's not talked about very often is how do you do a walkthrough? I've seen these run the gamuts of teams who do very well and how they put together a walkthrough, and then other teams who when you watch them, you think, wow, what a waste of time. What are some of the expectations, and what's the key to running a great walkthrough for a team?
I think that's a great question, and honestly, I think we can do it better. I have a picture for what I want our walkthroughs to look like, and sometimes we're closer to that picture than others, and I think a big part of the battle is constantly showing them your kids' buy-in and your kids' leadership is either your biggest asset or your biggest deterrent, and if the kids understand very explicitly how it makes them play faster, that's a big deal. We do a lot more than any point at any time since I've coached. We talk about playing with your eyes and what your eyes should be doing at every single moment. So that's a big emphasis in the walkthrough. I think we try to give it a situational emphasis as much as possible. We've been more structured at some times than others. I think in the best case scenario, every single time that you snap before you call the play, John Rice actually taught me this 15 years ago when he was with us at Trinity. He would have they would clap their hands to indicate the play was going to start, and then everybody would point to their assignments. Well, ideally, if all of our coaches are there and we're running like we should be, every coach is next to his position player. And when the ball snapped, that player says, I have a tight split top of the numbers. My release is a burst release 5x5. I straighten and I make a tight turn with my eyes on the corner's inside shoulder, whatever the case might be. So if they are verbally reciting to you what their expectation is before they actually walk the play. We're not always that good, but I would like to be that good. I would like to make it go snappier and a little more efficient. One good thing we have done is if a kid's in the rotation, if he is, let's say he's not your starting slot, but he's your third inside receiver, we'll have a kid that we're trying to develop and bring along. We'll have him actually stand behind his counterpart and mimic whatever happens in front of him so that he's actively involved in the walkthrough. Honestly, the biggest thing that we have to guard against, because we have so many kids in our program, is extra guys standing around with side conversations that become a distraction, and that's probably the biggest thing that we have to fight.
Yeah, definitely. That's always a challenge. You got to keep everybody engaged in those situations. It certainly sounds like that's a great picture, and thanks for sharing how you envision a walkthrough. You guys have had a record-setting year at Trinity, breaking the record for state titles, and you guys had an incredible performance, 56 points in the 6A state championship game. Over this season, too, is the first time you guys have been 15-0 since 2011. So you obviously brought things together. What would you look back on that and say, here's a play that is very important to us to be able to go through and have the success we had?
I would say, and I don't think this is a secret to anybody who watched this on video, historically our running game has been wide zone and then a hybrid of either the GT counter play or the tackle pull through dart play. Those have been real good to us. Some years we've thrown in tight zone. So last year in the off season, we hired a new offensive line coach, and we actually went to Eastern Kentucky. Terry Heffernan is the offensive line coach there. We knew him from his days at Michigan. We knew him from his days at the Lions. He really clanked us up on one-back power, and we had never been a one-back power team before. The tempo it gave us, we liked the sort of A-gap to A-gap attitude it gave us. There are some years, theoretically wide zone should hit in the A-gap at times, but we didn't really have an A-gap fastball, and it just really came together for us as some games it was our number one run, other games it was our number two run. The play action off of it, the RPOs that are connected to it, it just fit a whole bunch of things really well that rounded us out very well as an offense, and we didn't know what to expect with this group. We had 5 new offensive line. We really graduated everybody from last year except our 2 tight ends, and so we had no notion of what to expect from our offensive line, but we ended up being a really good running team early in the year, especially, and one-back power was a big part of it, strangely enough.
Coach, whether you're looking at the one-back power, your wide zone, or other things you do, how do you begin your process for game planning each week?
It's interesting. It's kind of a 2-phase deal. So you start with the negatives, and this will sound really broad based, but you start with the negatives and you look at all the problems that they can present. And so you look at their core structure. And I learned this from Dan. Some of it is about the actual fronts and the actual blitzes, but what you're really trying to look for behind it all is the personality and what sort of makes it work. Because they may be running this pressure and this slant versus this team, but it may not make any sense for them to run those things against you. So you can't just strictly be limited to your charts. You have to try to understand behind it, what are their triggers for how they adjust? How does the defensive coordinator think? How has he programmed these guys to key things and see the field and respond? What tools do they have in their toolbox? And so we try to look at those things. We obviously look for players that jump off the screen as problems, linebackers that run windows and can create negative plays, or pass rushers that are a specific problem, or safeties that break on the ball. So you're identifying problems in terms of structure and philosophy and calls like pressures and things like that. And also, I guess, along those lines, this has been important to us. Within their structure, what could they do that we're not seeing on video? Because a lot of times we're people's summer project, we're people's Super Bowl or whatever. So if you're an odd team, even if you don't show it on film, I'm going to assume, or an underfront team, I'm going to assume that you have the ability to bring America's Field Fire Zone, and we're going to practice against it. So within your structure, what are the real difficult things you can do, either because of what's on tape or because of your personnel or because of what your philosophy and your structure could allow you to do? So that takes the first part of the weekend. And then the second part of the weekend has to do with, okay, now what within our structure is going to cause problems for them? This off season, I actually did something that I'd never done before. I did kind of a map of our offense. And the reason I did it is because we had a player move in who'd never been in our system before, but he was a remarkable talent, and we had to get him up to speed really quickly. So I represented our whole offense visually in terms of, here's our running game, here's our screens, here's our play action pass, here's our RPO stuff, and here's how it overlaps with the running game. And that visual really helped me sort of understand what we have in our arsenal. So very quickly, I can look at that map now and see, okay, this is obviously a fit. This isn't a fit. And then I would say the next thing that I do is I see things in terms of formations, and we tend to try to solve problems with formations more so than we will scheming things. If we can solve a problem or create a problem with an alignment or a movement, I would much rather do that than creating a new blocking scheme or creating a new line call. We'd like to keep it pretty clean for the offensive linemen. So that sort of visual in mind and those problems in mind, we can trim down our overall inventory pretty quickly. And then what I try to do, and I'm not as good at this as I should be, is that we sort of model the Bruce Arians Dirty 30. And what I try to do is I try to come up with 10 run concepts that I really like, which probably, 4 or 5 of those are wide zone, 3 or 4 of those are power, 2 or 3 of those are miscellaneous or quarterback-driven runs. 10 core pass concept, and play action will be included in that. And then the in-between category, the other 10 are going to be screens, run-pass options, combination plays, things like that, and then work from that core. And that takes us through Tuesday. Monday's a big work day for us. Tuesday is a big work day for us. It's base situations. By Wednesday, when we go to create the third down menu and the red zone menu and the goal line menu, hopefully a lot of that from Tuesday carries over. We have a pretty good idea of what we need to add, subtract, and delete by that point.
So, Coach, obviously you gain a lot of insight and you have a process, a system for doing that. How do you translate that to your script and your practice plan and making sure that you have all those details that you need to get into practice taken care of?
Having a format, Excel is really helpful. The GPS model that you created was really helpful. It gave us a template to start with, which we've obviously modified somewhat. But I think having a structure, and what that serves for me is it forces me to narrow things down. Like, it limits my inventory so I don't go into a game with too much. And so we have a pretty set format we use for repping our running game. We get a lot of carry. We do a period called live pass, which is a blitz pickup, but we've integrated a lot more aspects into the live pass where the quarterback is actually making a throw and executing a read. So we get a lot more of our passing game covered that way than we would ordinarily. And then a lot of times we use Thursday as sort of we really front load our week. Thursday is pretty light at this point, but by doing it that way, we give ourselves room. If we need to review or clean something up from Thursday, we can do that. And then the other thing that we do is we do a lot of coaching off the video, which is probably not unusual, but we send a lot of corrections to the kid via huddle of practice video, and that allows us to kind of vet things, if you will. At other times, we've done contingency periods, so we have 3 or 4 contingencies, I would say, that we always expect could show up any week, even if it's not on film. We have cover zero contingencies, we have double mug contingencies, we have bear contingencies, we have press man contingencies, and so some of that is built in even from camp on. The kids kind of know what our answers are, and if we feel like we need to brush it up on Thursday, we can, but those things stay pretty true throughout the year.
Coach, the critical situations are the things we need sometimes to win those ball games. It's those plays, it's those calls that keep the chains moving on third down, or it's the calls that finish a drive. Looking back on the 2016 state championship season, what's one of those situations you can recall, and exactly how did you approach it? What was your thought process and strategy for making that call?
So one of the things that we always wrestle with is how much different in high school ball is your red zone offense than your open field offense. And I've probably overdone that at times because a lot of high school defenses really don't change personality as much till inside the 10. And so I've done a lot of reflecting on that. And a lot of times I'll get into the flow of the game and I won't use my base down red zone calls at all. But one thing that has really helped us is having very specific conversion calls for a couple different areas of the red zone. And so the red zone can redefine itself based on your opponent and where they start changing. But for us, by and large, we're going to carry a third and medium, a third and goal from the 5, a third and goal from the 4, 5, or 6, a third and goal from the 7, 8, or 9, and then we'll have another specific call for third and long in the red zone, i.e. the 20 to the 10, and third and medium in the red zone, so that we can very aggressively go get it. And we will practice those calls probably 3 to 4 times from Wednesday to Thursday, and even into a Friday pregame walkthrough. And so we're playing our rival in the state semifinals, Louisville St. Xavier, who's really well coached, and we did not play our best ball that night by any means. They had a lot to do with that. But the game really ended up kind of turning on 2 of those calls. We had a third and 9, I want to say, from the 16, and there wasn't anything magical about the call. We took the best kid on the field. We isolated him away from quads, and we threw a stop route, and we scored. And then we had a third and goal from the 5, and same thing. We put the best kid on the field weak side, and we threw a 3-step. It was actually supposed to be a 3-step naked, and we ended up throwing the slant part to him for a touchdown. And I don't think it was anything magical about the calls, but the fact that we've kind of devoted ourselves to that philosophy got me to those calls very quickly and kept us in rhythm. And my boss is real big on rhythm and having the plays in on time because it affects the whole sort of mojo of your offense. Whereas in years past, I would have really scrambled to kind of come up with what's the perfect call for 3rd and 5 on the 6. But we just went right to it, and it involved the best player, and it involved something our kids were comfortable with. And the fact that we got touchdowns instead of field goals were really big. They were going to win the game, I think, 24-14. So it's easy to see if you're settling for field goals. It might have been a whole different night.
Coach, we're going to shift gears here and go into a segment we call Lessons in Learning and try to go back through some of your experiences here and figure out what lessons we can take from your learning. So let's go back to the beginning and think about you as a young coach. What mistake did you make as a young coach, and what did you learn from it?
I think for me, it connects to being a young coach, but it's more of an ongoing thing. I think that there's a temptation to get so absorbed in especially when you're a coordinator and you're responsible for it all, but there's a temptation to get so absorbed in the technical parts of what you're doing that you lose sight of the leadership aspects of it and you lose sight of the people aspects of it. And so I still have to catch myself with this today, although I think I'm a lot more aware of it than I was, is that if I can't take a step back and have a pulse on my team, because in the coordinator role, you're every bit as much of a leader as you are a technician. You set the tone, you create the momentum, you establish the expectations and teach people how to get there. And so if I'm just scripting and calling plays and not actively giving thought to how am I leading my coaches, how am I leading my men, that's an issue. And if I'm so absorbed with getting the script done on time that I can't be aware of, this running back, he's in a world of hurt. His friend just got put in the hospital, or, what is it that I need to do to get more out of this receiver in terms of when he doesn't have the ball, and what's the conversation I need to have with my left tackle? When I get away from those things because I'm so involved in what the 3rd and 2 call is going to be, I think I've missed it. And so that was a big problem when I was younger, and it's still something that I have to really work at and have good coaches around me who can kind of, pull me back out of the rabbit hole at times.
What's the best coaching advice you've received in your career?
There's a bunch of it, and I referred to a bit of it earlier from Dan as far as giving back to the profession. Another thing I heard from Dan that I don't really think I could absorb it at the time, but I get it more and more. One day we're in a staff meeting after we had a bad game, and he just looked at us and said, blame is ridiculous. Blame doesn't solve anything. And so I've always tried to be mindful of that in terms of looking for solutions and how we can enlist all of our people and all of our coaches and all of our resources and solutions rather than worrying about exactly whose fault it was. That was really helpful. And I think the phrase that I've heard, I don't know where I heard this from, but you hear it all the time, is, you get what you demand and you get what you tolerate. That's always kind of guided me, especially when you're in a coordinator's position. The product you see on film is a direct reflection of what you demanded throughout the week, throughout camp, throughout all of it, and a direct reflection of what you allowed to go on unchecked and unconfronted. And I think just the simplicity of that is really sobering and really important for me.
What advice would you give a young coach looking to make it in this profession long term?
Well, a couple things. The first thing is listen more than you think you should. I'm a terrible listener early in my career, and I alienated a lot of men that I could have learned a lot from if I hadn't been so self-assured and such a poor listener. I would say learn that every single person you work with and from offers you something, even if you couldn't possibly imagine yourself doing it the way that they do it. And I've been in, I've coached as a position coach and even as a coordinator in systems that were not my cup of tea at all, but I learned a lot from those, and I've been around coaches with a lot of different philosophies, and I've learned a lot from them. And if I missed those opportunities, I would be a lot lesser for it. And I guess the other thing I would say is develop at least as much time and energy on your skill as a communicator and a teacher as you do time and energy learning the technical parts of the game. I would never sell short the idea of learning your craft, but you should give equal attention to how you grow as a teacher and a communicator. And I heard this phrase, and I know it's kind of a phrase, right? So I'm not bashing it, but I heard somebody talk about it on one of your podcasts. they talk about how culture trumps scheme or culture trumps technique. And I guess the thing that I would say, this is completely off topic, by the way, is that to me, that's a false dichotomy. I mean, to me, I want to be a part of a culture that wants to have the best of everything, the best of how we care for each other, the best of how we practice, the best of how we learn, the best of how we hit. And so technique and scheme would fit seamlessly into the kind of culture that I would want. I don't know that I would want to be in a culture that devalued scheme, because scheme is all about giving your kids opportunities.
Right.
Anyway, those are things that I would share with a young coach if I got a chance.
Coach, what's a book you've learned from that you would recommend to our listeners?
It's funny. Some of your earlier guests stole some of the best answers. The Carol Dweck stuff on growth mindset is a really big one. Just in terms of how football is a game of failure, and if you don't understand how to process that failure and frame that failure, when we talk about life lessons all the time, most of life's lessons have to do with the fact that the world's really not fair, and you have to find a way to work productively within that. And that football forces failure upon you every day. And so that's why I think the Carol Dweck book that I think Dan Gonzalez referenced was so important, because it gives you a whole new framework for failure just really being the fertilizer for growth. So that was important. I think offensively speaking, they don't get much more important than Ryan Billick's book, just in terms of how you frame your own inventory and teaching and just really having a scientific approach to the game. I know that, just the framework of, the big four of explosives and turnovers and first down efficiency and third down efficiency, that's as true today as it was in 1998. Anything about Bill Walsh, anything by Bill Walsh, especially finding the winning edge, are really, really important for me as well, just because of how comprehensive it was in nature.
Coach, what's something you've taken from a coaching clinic and implemented into what you do?
The very first time I remember really having my head spun by a clinic was hearing Jim McNally talk about the drop step. And I didn't really exactly understand it at the time, but he made all the coaches in the Cincinnati ballroom we were in, he made all the coaches get up against the wall and practice leveraging the wall while taking a drop step, so we would experience how much more you could get out of your hips by drop stepping. So that's certainly one thing. I think this is going to be probably a more general answer than you want, but something that's really helpful for me is just understanding how guys think. So for example, especially defensive coaches. So Jim Herman is a really, really tremendous teacher. I first bumped into him when I used to go visit Lloyd Carr's staffs at Michigan. He gave a talk one time where he talked about how they break down film and some of the reactive categories they have, like, what does an offensive coordinator do on second down after through an incompletion on first down? And just the whole notion of just learning how he as a defensive coach thinks and approaches the game. That was incredibly helpful to me. So sometimes it is specific schemes and tweaks. I used to go to watch Rob Spence clinic all the time, who's at Chattanooga now. Just watching him teach the screen game with this incredible passion and detail, that had a big influence on me. But also just seeing how guys think and how they perceive the game. That helps me when I look at video, imagine what the thought process is behind what I'm seeing on tape.
As we approach this offseason, what's something you're excited to learn about in research?
Always like watching Chris Peterson offenses, so I'm looking forward to seeing how he deals with Alabama's front four in the playoff for sure. Just watching him in general. I'm always on the lookout for ways people are integrating their screen game. We try to grow our screen game every year. I don't have a particular type of screen I'm looking for, other than just what little bit I've seen of the Falcons really intrigues me with what they're doing with the screen game. So we want to expand that. Like everybody else, I'll be interested to see where the whole RPO world goes. We have invested in it. We have not sort of submerged ourselves head first. It seems like every time we successfully call one, we get called for an illegal guy down the field. So it's a little scary to me because of how much variation there is from crew to crew, at least in Kentucky. But obviously, I think you have to keep your finger on that pulse as well. And I'm also real interested to see what defensive coaches are going to, like the Vikings, are going to continue to do with the 4-2 double mug, double A gap stuff. I think that's a trend that's going to make its way into high school real soon. And I want to make sure I'm on top of that.
What's your favorite piece of coaching technology or something you're looking forward to trying out in your workflow?
kind of got a little bit of the old school and the new school. PowerPoint continues to be very important for us. Excel is incredibly important for us in organizing our work. But the virtual reality part, and I heard you talk about Go Army Edge, is really something that I want to take a look at, just because, at a place like ours, it's been a lot of years since I've had a returning quarterback. At a big school setting like ours, with good tradition, a lot of times you're going to be playing a senior quarterback. It's true this year, it's true last year, it's true the year before. And so we have to find ways to accelerate the reps and accelerate the learning process. And obviously people are doing some great things with virtual reality.
How do you create balance with the passion you have for this game and all it demands, as well as giving that time that's necessary for family, faith, your health, etc.?
That you actually just probably asked the right question, and in terms of that really should have been my advice for young coaches, because I think the first thing to kind of come to grips with is that it's going to be an ongoing wrestling match. I don't think there's a once and for all answer, and I've done real damage to important people in my own life because of failing at exactly that. And then of course you go through the cycle. It's almost like an addict of, well, I'll never do that again, and then you find yourself slipping into the same trends. My wife and I, we talk at the end of every year in terms of what are the things that we're doing well as a family, where are ways that we can, where are ways that we're not doing as well, what changes do we need to make, and we have those conversations as a family. I think I've done a little better each year about being more present. Once I do get home, you have to force yourself to invest in people around you. The biggest mistakes I've made has been when I've taken it all on myself, like the whole world depended on me getting everything right, and you just can't do that. You have to invest in people and then delegate to them and trust that they'll do what you're asking them to do, or it becomes really distorted really quickly. So that's important. Time management's important. That's something that I always wrestle with. I just think it's an ongoing battle. And I don't know that there's one final answer, and I would be a little leery of somebody that said that they had it all figured out. But it is important to me, and I do want, we got 2 little babies right now. We adopted a little girl this time last year, and we have a little foster son that are both under 2. And assuming I am still in this profession in 15 years, I don't want them to feel like they got my leftovers, and so I don't know. You should ask me that question this time next year, and hopefully I'm about 10% better at it next year than I am this year.
Well, it's always a process. It's something we got to learn from. So thanks for sharing what you've learned with us thus far. I don't know that anybody has the complete answer, but I know it's one that all of us struggle with in this profession because it is so demanding. What concerns do you have right now for the future of our game, and what ideas do you have that address those issues?
I liked what Kevin Kelly said. I think we've got everything in our world right now is message management, and we have to deliver the message on our terms, because there's a lot of message out there that has partial truth and half truths, but if people yell it loud enough, often enough, on enough social media platforms, it has a strange way of morphing into truth. So I think we have to find a way to, I think all of us owe the game to know what the facts are and to present the facts at every turn, and to demonstrate that we are putting the young men first at every turn. And not that any of us are perfect at that, but I think the concussion protocols are important and they're helpful. The shoulder tackling emphasis is important and helpful. I think we have to kind of have open hands to what might have to be next, whether it involves something with special teams or whatever, to keep the game flourishing. I think what you mentioned earlier about youth coaching is really, really important, because sometimes I see some of the things that happen with 3rd and 4th graders in pads, and I would, I'm not sure I want my little boy to be involved in that myself. So I think that's a concern. I also think just the quality and quantity of officiating is a concern. It's a concern at our level. We played in a state championship game that was incredibly poorly officiated and could have been really costly in a lot of ways because of how poorly officiated. Not wins and losses, but the whole experience was not what it should have been, because we're not getting the same quality and quantity of guys, and I think we need to treat those guys better and incentivize them and do what we can to ensure the highest quality product is on the field officiating wise. So those would be a couple things right off the top of my head.
Coach, we're going to speed it up in this next segment, our 2-minute drill. Just some quick question and answers on some various football topics. So
sure.
We'll start with this. Schematically, what's the toughest defense to face?
A 3-4, 2-gapping defense with multiple pressures and coverage.
What's your favorite goal line play?
Probably, wide zone. Wide zone's been tried and true for a long time. We haven't really topped that one yet.
Turf or grass?
If I don't have to maintain it, and practice is not an issue. Like on a one-game basis, so give me a well-manicured grass field. But in terms of having to live with it day in and day out, the convenience of it, turf. There's nothing like a good grass field, man.
Favorite backfield set?
Probably one back. Probably we still go under center quite a bit, but probably one back under center or one back pistol, just because we have a pretty full range of what we want to do offensively out of that.
Day game or night game?
Night game.
If you had to run your offense from one formation, what would it be?
Oh, you don't know how incredibly sad I would be, but probably 2 tight ends as a tight end wing set to the boundary with a slot to the field.
Here, I'll add this on to you to give you a cheat on it with lots of shifts and motions, right?
Oh, yeah. But, of course, based on your constraint, they would always know where we're going to end up. So that wouldn't help me any.
What's your favorite quote?
I guess the one that we have probably lived off of the most, that helps us connect with our kids the most, is just, the win is meaningless without the will to prepare. So I think the preparation ethic that's kind of contained in that quote is incredibly central to who we try to be.
Should the kickoff be eliminated?
I'm not there yet. But yeah, if that's what they decide that we have to, if that's what they decide that we have to do, then I wouldn't fight it very hard. But I'm not at the point of advocating that.
If you could pick one football coach from the past, either retired or no longer with us, to learn from, who would it be?
I think Bob Ladouceur, because I think if you're going to talk about culture and you're going to talk about trying to have the lasting impact of really the big picture of what we're trying to do, just beyond winning, the guy who won without ever talking about winning. I know there's a lot of material out on him now, but that's someone that I would certainly like to talk to.
How about one from the present?
Here's a funny one for you. I would want to talk to Brad Stevens. To me, Brad Stevens is maybe my favorite coach in all of sports, period, with the Celtics. I just love the fact that he's not afraid to be himself. He's demanding, but it's within his personality, and I think he's fascinating. Extremely down to earth, obviously. That would be my choice.
How many teams should be included in the FBS playoff?
There should be 6. There should be the 5 conference champions should go, so that the conference championships serve as de facto play-in games, and then you should have one additional, either at large, the next best team, like a Michigan, or I don't know about Penn, but somebody like that they can argue about that all they want, but the top 2 seeds get the week off. But I think the thing you have to do if you're going to do that is you have to eliminate some of these divisional imbalances, like the Big Ten East, the 2 best teams and being one division in the Big Ten and the 3 best in the ACC. I think you would have to rework that a little bit. But I would like I didn't think that conference champions should automatically be in or out this year. I would just like a system where those games had that kind of tangible drama.
Sure. All things being equal, run it or throw it?
I'd say run the football, and I say that because I think the thing that's really underrated in high school ball is high school offensive lineman pass protecting is risky business now, especially if you have accomplished pass rushers on the other side. I think running the ball is the surest way to get there.
Good job on the 2-minute drill, Coach. Here's the final question. And you've experienced this. You've been at the pinnacle with your teams a number of times now with a state championship. So what's the one thing you would point to as giving your teams, your units, the winning edge?
I think and people in Kentucky won't like to hear this because our alumni bang the drums about it so much that it creates resentment. But I think that our kids' willingness and buy-in and capacity for work in the summer when the season is far, far away. When I went and coached at a very well-established public school in Indiana as a head coach for 3 years and took basically the roots of our the fundamentals of our summer program at Trinity there. I was told it was inhumane. And I know everybody works hard, but I think the capacity that our kids have to do the lifting, to do the speed development, to do the football work, to do the study outside of time. I mean, they're spending 4 or 5 hours a day. There's a lot that goes into there's a lot of other things that go into it, but that creates a foundation that gives us a chance to make everything else work. And I'm honestly, when I see what our kids do, even in the in season, I'm really in awe. I mean, they're getting to school at 7:30. A lot of times they get a full academic load. They have a practice. They have a lift. They have a film session. They're home at 7:30, and they've still got homework. I mean, I know a lot of programs can say the same thing. I have immense respect for the sacrifice and the efforts of our young men on what they're willing to do. And so, without that, I think a lot of this other stuff wouldn't really matter.
Coach, how do our listeners connect with you?
I'm on Twitter. I think it's just Andrew Coverdale. And then my email address is my full name, Andrew Coverdale, and then @gmail.com.
Coach, as always, I appreciate talking ball with you. Thank you for taking the time to be on the show, and I look forward to talking more ball with you in the future.
You bet. Thanks, Keith. It's been a blast.